The black SUVs were already there when she turned onto her block. Two of them, no plates, engines running. A man in a dark suit on her front steps who wasn't moving, wasn't checking his phone, just watching her door like he'd been there for a while and was prepared to stay. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Miss Reeves, we're not here about you. We're here about Walter." Imani stood on the sidewalk in her overnight scrubs, thermos still warm from the coffee she'd made at 5 a.m., and tried to remember how a simple act of kindness had led her here. 8 months. A brown paper bag. A man on cardboard who never asked for her name. She thought she'd been bringing him breakfast. She had no idea he'd been keeping her safe. For 8 months, Imani Reeves brought breakfast to the quiet old man at the corner of Delancey and 5th. But a thermos of black coffee, a brown paper bag with something warm inside. 6:20 a.m., without fail, still in the scrubs she'd worn through a double shift, moving through a city that hadn't woken up yet. She was 24, black, a nursing aide at Mercy General who knew what it looked like when a body had been ignored too long. He was 74, white-bearded, sitting on flattened cardboard with the absolute stillness of a man who had made peace, long ago, with being unseen. His name was Walter. Then one morning she came home from her overnight shift and found 2 black SUVs parked outside her building. No plates she could read, tinted windows, a man in a dark suit standing at her front steps, not checking his phone, not fidgeting, just watching her door with the practiced stillness of someone trained to wait. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. The one line, "Miss Reeves, we're not here about you. We're here about Walter and what he left in your hands." Imani stood on that sidewalk in her wrinkled scrubs, thermos still warm, and understood for the first time that the quiet old man at the bus stop had never been just a quiet old man. 8 months earlier, she had overfilled a thermos. It started the way most things that change your life start, with something too small to plan around. A Tuesday morning in October. Imani was running 3 minutes late for the bus, moving fast past the shuttered laundromat on Delancey, coffee sloshing over the rim of her thermos because she'd filled it in a hurry. She almost didn't look down. Walter was sitting where he always sat. Cardboard, wool jacket 2 sizes too big, and a trash bag of belongings tucked behind him like he was protecting it in his sleep. Most people walked past without looking. Imani had done the same thing for 2 weeks, telling herself she had nothing extra to give, telling herself she barely had enough for herself, which was true. But that morning her thermos was over full, and the man's lips were cracked from cold, and she couldn't unknow both of those things at the same time. What kind of person walks past that? She stopped, crouched down, held out the thermos with both hands. "I made too much," she said. "You want some?" Walter looked at the thermos, then at her face. A long, measuring silence, the kind that comes from a man who has learned to tell the difference between pity and something else. He took it. No performance of gratitude, no desperation. Just both hands around warm metal and a single slow nod, like he'd been waiting for her to stop, like the only question had been when. "Thank you," he said. His voice was careful, each word placed deliberately, the way you speak when you've spent a long time speaking to no one. That should have been the end of it. One thermos, one morning, conscience satisfied. She came back the next day, and the next. By November, it was ritual. Scrubs, brown bag, thermos, the corner of Delancey, and 5th before the city found its volume. 15 minutes, then the bus. Walter always awake, always sitting the same way, back against the laundromat wall, facing the street. He asked about her patients. He remembered their names a week later. He listened the way people do when they've had nothing but time and silence. Completely, without interruption. "I like your words are worth storing." But occasionally he said things that didn't fit. "I used to read rooms like this one. Know what's wrong before anyone speaks. There are people in this city whose job is to know where I am. They stopped looking. That suits me fine. You have good instincts. Don't let anyone tell you that's a small thing. Imani filed it away as the quiet philosophy of a man who had lived too much. She didn't probe, she just brought the bag. Just showed up. That was the whole of it. Then one Thursday in March, she rounded the corner and Walter was gone. No cardboard, no jacket, no trash bag. Just cold pavement and the faint impression where his cardboard had been, slowly disappearing in the morning damp. She waited through 2 buses. He didn't come back for 11 days. When he reappeared, he was thinner. And something behind his eyes had shifted. Or maybe it had always been there, and she'd never been meant to see it. Before she could say a word, he pressed a small folded note into her palm. "Don't open this here," he said quietly. "Don't tell anyone you have it." Then he sat back down on his cardboard and accepted the coffee she was still holding, as if nothing had happened. As if he hadn't just placed something in her hands whose weight she wouldn't understand for weeks. She didn't open the note for 3 days. When she finally did, sitting on her bathroom floor at midnight, the only room in the apartment where she felt contained, the handwriting inside was not old or shaky. It was precise, controlled. The print of someone trained to communicate under pressure. 1 name. 1 phone number. 4 words. Only if something happens. Nothing happened. For 6 more weeks, the routine held. Coffee, bag, 15 minutes, bus. Imani almost convinced herself the note meant nothing. Almost. Some people sit at the corner of invisible and forgotten. The ones who stop, who actually stop, never know what they're stepping into, until the black SUVs arrive. But to understand what those SUVs meant, to understand why 2 intelligence officers were standing outside the apartment of a 24-year-old nursing aide from the Bronx, you have to go back to the beginning. Back to a Tuesday morning in October, a thermos overfilled by 3 inches, and a question Imani Reeves couldn't unask once she'd thought it. Back to before she knew his last name. Back to when he was just Walter, just the quiet old man at the corner. Stay with us. Because this story doesn't end where you think it does. And the part that will change how you see people, that comes next. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. And before we go further, drop a comment right now. Just 1 word. The first word that comes to mind when someone you passed on the street today crosses your memory. We'll wait. Nobody named it. That was the thing. There was no conversation where Imani said, "I'm going to do this every day," and no morning where Walter said, "I'll be here waiting." It just became true the way certain things do. Quietly, without ceremony, until one day you realize you've built something without ever laying a foundation. By the 2nd week, she was getting up 20 minutes earlier. By the 3rd, she was packing 2 bags instead of 1, her lunch for the hospital in her backpack. In Walter's breakfast, in a separate brown bag she kept near the door so she wouldn't forget it. Egg sandwich on Mondays when she had time to cook. Peanut butter on the days she didn't. Always the thermos. Always 6:20. Walter was always awake. Always in the same position. Back flat against the laundromat wall, facing the street. Both hands resting on his knees. Like he'd been sitting there since before the city started and would be sitting there long after it stopped. He never rushed to take the bag. He always said thank you the same way. Once, quietly, like a period at the end of a sentence. And then, after a beat, he'd ask about her patients. Not generally, specifically. "How's the woman in 4B, the one with the hip?" "Mrs. Okafor. She went home Thursday." A slow nod. Satisfied. Filed away. He remembered everything she mentioned, and sometimes weeks after she'd said it with the precision of someone who had spent their life paying attention to details others let go. It should have felt odd. Somehow it just felt like being known. He spoke carefully in short sentences, like a man who had learned long ago that words had weight and you didn't spend them carelessly. But every few mornings, something surfaced that didn't quite belong to a man living on cardboard. "I used to read rooms like this one," he said once, watching a group of suited men argue outside the coffee shop across the street. "Know what's wrong before anyone speaks." He said it the way you'd mention the weather. Imani nodded and handed him his coffee. Another morning, "There are people in this city whose job is to know where I am." A pause. They stopped looking. "That suits me fine." She filed it. Quiet philosophy. A man who had lived too much and processed it in fragments. The morning she stopped filing it was a Wednesday in November. A man in a delivery uniform cut the corner too fast and kicked Walter's trash bag into the curb without slowing down. Not an accident. The deliberate, contemptuous not-looking of someone who had decided Walter didn't register. Imani was already halfway to the bus stop. She turned around. "Hey!" Her voice came out sharp enough that two people looked up from their phones. The delivery man kept walking. "That's somebody's—" She stopped, recalibrated. "That's a person's belongings. You don't do that." The man didn't answer, just kept moving. Imani helped Walter pull the bag back from the gutter. He watched her the whole time with an expression she couldn't quite name, something caught between pride and a sorrow that ran deeper than the moment. "You've got fight," he said quietly when she straightened up. "Good." He looked back at the street. "You'll need it." She almost asked what he meant. Her bus was coming. She didn't ask. What she noticed instead, settling into her seat and watching the corner shrink through the window, was the way Walter's eyes had tracked that delivery man, not with anger, not with hurt, but with the focused, cataloging attention of someone who was always, always watching. Not out of boredom, out of habit, out of training. She didn't have the word for it yet, but it sat in the back of her mind the whole ride to work, quiet and waiting, like something that already knew its time would come. And the corner was empty on a Thursday. Not just Walter hadn't arrived yet, empty. Completely empty. The cardboard was gone. The trash bag was gone. The small indentation in the pavement where his jacket had compressed the dirt over weeks of the same position, even that felt erased, like the city had exhaled and smoothed itself over. Imani stood there holding the brown bag and the thermos and waited. First bus came. She let it go. Second bus came. She let that one go too. By the time she finally stepped aboard the third, she was 40 minutes late for her shift, and her chest felt like something had been removed from it while she wasn't paying attention. She told herself he'd moved spots. People did that. Maybe a cop had cleared the block. Maybe someone had offered him a bed somewhere. There were reasonable explanations, and she repeated them to herself on the bus, in the elevator at work, while she restocked supply carts and checked vitals and smiled at patients who needed her present. He didn't come back the next day, or the one after. By day 4, she was leaving the brown bag at the corner anyway, a note folded inside. "Just checking you're okay. Imani." She didn't know if he'd see it. She left it regardless. Day 5, she walked 4 blocks out of her way to the Delancey Street shelter. The woman at the intake desk had the face of someone who answered the same questions too many times a day. "Walter?" "Older white man, mid-70s, usually at the corner of Delancey and 5th. "We don't track people who don't check in here. Can you just look?" A sigh. A few keystrokes. A head shake. She called 2 hospitals that week. On privacy regulations. No patient information without a family relation or an ID number she didn't have. She asked Marcus, the overnight security guard at the laundromat, who shrugged and said he hadn't seen him in days. She posted in the neighborhood Facebook group and got 3 responses. 2 people telling her he was probably fine, 1 person suggesting she contact 311. Every dead end felt like confirmation of something she already knew. The system designed to track people had simply decided Walter didn't exist. There was no record to pull, no file to check. He had fallen through every net so completely that looking for him felt like reaching into water. On the 9th night, she lay awake and made herself ask the question she'd been avoiding. Why does this matter so much? She thought about her grandmother, 81 years old in a VA facility in Queens, dying over the course of 6 weeks while the family visited twice. Imani had been 19. She'd gone every Thursday. She had held a woman's hand through a death that didn't have to be lonely and had carried the weight of everyone who hadn't come ever since. She passed people on the street every day, dozens of them. She didn't stop. Walter was the one she had stopped for. That had to mean something. She had to mean something to it. He reappeared on day 11, thinner. That was the first thing. His jacket hung differently on his shoulders. But it was his eyes that stopped her. Not emptier, not confused. Sharper, differently sharp, like a mask she'd never noticed had slipped 2 degrees to the left and hadn't been fully reset. Before she could speak, he pressed a small folded note into her palm. "Don't open this here." His voice was low, controlled. "Don't tell anyone you have it." Then he sat back down on his cardboard and held out his hand for the thermos, like nothing had happened. Like he hadn't been gone for 11 days. Like she hadn't left brown bags at an empty corner and called hospitals and lost sleep over a man whose last name she still didn't know. She handed him the coffee. That's when she saw the mark on his left wrist, just below the cuff of his jacket sleeve, visible for only a second before he pulled the fabric back down. Not a wound. The skin was healed. Clean. Something deliberate. Precise in the way that only deliberate things are. She didn't ask. Something about the set of his jaw told her the answer wasn't hers to have yet. But she walked to her bus with the note in her pocket and her hands not quite steady, the city moving around her the way it always did, indifferent, loud, completely unaware that anything had shifted. She didn't open the note. Not yet. She carried it for 3 days without opening it. First day it lived in her left scrub's pocket, folded exactly as Walter had handed it to her, once lengthwise, once across. She was aware of it the way you're aware of a sound you can't identify, not constantly, just always. Between patient checks, restocking the supply cart, eating half a sandwich standing over the break room sink. The note, still there. Second day she moved it to her nightstand before her shift, deciding she'd read it when she got home. She got home at 11:40 p.m., stood in the doorway of her bedroom, looked at it, and went to brush her teeth instead. Third day it rode in her bag on the bus, and she caught herself not looking at her phone, not looking out the window, just aware of the bag on her lap and the thing inside it. A woman across the aisle was laughing at something on her screen. Someone's music bled through their headphones. The city went about its business. Don't tell anyone you have it. She hadn't. Midnight. She was sitting on the bathroom floor with her back against the tub because something about the smallness of the room made her feel contained. The tile was cold through her sweatpants. The rest of the apartment felt too open. She unfolded the note. The handwriting stopped her first. She'd expected shaky cursive, the slow, careful letters of an old man's hand. This was neither. Block print, controlled and even, each letter the same height. The kind of handwriting you'd use if you'd spent years writing things that needed to be read clearly under pressure, in bad light, quickly. One name, R. Calloway. One phone number, area code she didn't recognize. 4 words. Only if something happens. She sat with it, turned it over. The back was blank. She typed the name into her phone. The first results were ordinary. A dentist in Ohio, a retired professor, a LinkedIn profile. She scrolled. Then, on the 3rd page, something that didn't belong. A cached link to a 2003 Wire report, the original article long deleted. The visible text was partial, truncated. Calloway, formerly of the Defense Intelligence Agency, whose testimony was sealed following the inquiry into... And then nothing. The link was dead. She stared at the words Defense Intelligence Agency for a long time. At 1 a.m., she called the number. It rang 4 times. No voicemail greeting, just a single tone, flat, neutral, and then silence, waiting for her to speak. She hung up. She brought the bag the next morning the same as always. Walter accepted the thermos the same as always. But she looked at him differently now, and somewhere in the first minute of silence between them, she understood something she'd been seeing for months without naming it. He always sat with his back to the wall, always facing the street. When anyone rounded the corner, a jogger, a dog walker, a delivery truck slowing at the curb, his eyes found them before they were fully visible. Not the scanning drift of boredom, assessment, categorization. Here and filed and not a threat and moving on. And all in under 2 seconds. She had thought it was habit. She wasn't sure anymore. The people who matter most in any operation, Walter said that morning, apparently to no one, watching a sanitation truck make its slow turn, are the ones nobody thinks to look at. He said it like he was thinking out loud, like it was adjacent to something she'd mentioned about a patient. She nodded. He wasn't talking about her patients. That evening, she taped the note to the inside cover of her nursing textbook, the thick one, Fundamentals of Care, that lived permanently on her nightstand. Somewhere it would look like nothing. 6 weeks passed. The routine held. Coffee, bag, 15 minutes, bus. Walter asked about her patients. She brought an extra banana on Fridays. The city moved around them, indifferent as ever. But she almost convinced herself the note meant nothing. Almost. The word did a lot of work, because every few days she'd open her textbook to study and see the edge of that folded paper, and the same 4 words would surface in her mind like something that had learned to float. Only if something happens. She was still telling herself nothing would. The overnight shift ended at 6 a.m. Imani signed out, pulled on her jacket in the locker room, and tucked the empty thermos under her arm. She'd planned to stop at the corner before going home. Fill it, drop off the bag, 15 minutes, then sleep. The same math she'd been running for 8 months. She turned onto her block at 6:10 and stopped walking. Before we continue, make sure you're subscribed, because what happens next changes everything. 2 black SUVs at the curb. And not parked the way regular cars park. Settled in, angled slightly, engines still running. No plates she could read from where she stood. Windows tinted past the legal limit. They had the quality of objects that weren't meant to be questioned. The man on her front steps was in a dark suit, no tie. He wasn't checking his phone. He wasn't looking at his watch. He was simply standing, weight evenly distributed, watching her building's door with the total stillness of someone who had been trained to wait indefinitely and was fine with it. She almost didn't catch the second one, a figure at the alley entrance to her left, half inside the shadow of the adjacent building. Same stillness, different angle. She had been bracketed, positioned around, without knowing it, in the 20 steps since she'd turned the corner. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She looked down at the screen. 1 line. Miss Reeves, we're not here about you. We're here about Walter, and what he left in your hands. Her hands went cold first. That was the order of it. Body before mind, the way it always is when something real happens. Cold hands. Then the awareness of the thermos under her arm, empty. The one she'd carried to that corner 240-some mornings. Then the note. Home. Taped inside the front cover of a textbook on her nightstand. A name she'd never spoken out loud to anyone. A phone number she'd called once and hung up before the silence could answer. Only if something happens. And she stood on the sidewalk in yesterday's scrubs and felt the specific vertigo of understanding that something had already been in motion, had been in motion for longer than she knew, and that she was standing in the middle of it, not at the beginning of it. The man on the steps hadn't moved. He wasn't looking at her directly. He didn't need to. He knew exactly where she was. She could turn around. That was the thought that came next, clean and logical. She could walk back to the corner, catch the bus, go somewhere the city swallowed people, a diner, a laundromat, anywhere with noise and strangers. She had done nothing wrong. The note was in her apartment. The name was in her head. She could let this whole thing pass over her like weather. She thought about Walter pressing that note into her palm on day 11, in the deliberateness of it. The mark on his wrist, the way he'd sat back down and accepted the coffee like he was transferring something sacred and had to pretend otherwise to protect them both. Only if something happens. Something had happened. She crossed the street. The man on the steps saw her coming and didn't react. No adjustment, no reaching for anything, no signal to the figure in the alley. He simply waited until she was 3 feet away and then looked at her directly for the first time. "Miss Reeves." His voice was even, professional. Whatever she'd expected it to sound like, it wasn't this. Almost gentle. "My name is Agent Reyes, Department of Defense, Inspector General's office." A pause, letting the words settle. "Walter Gaines asked us to find you before anyone else did." She held his gaze. Walter's last name is Gaines?" "Yes, ma'am." Something moved briefly behind his eyes. "There are other people looking for you right now. We got here first." Another pause. "That matters, Miss Reeves. More than I can explain on these steps." The thermos was still under her arm. The city moved behind her, indifferent as always, completely unaware. "Then don't explain it on the steps," she said. "Start talking somewhere else." The conference room was on the 4th floor of a building in Midtown that had no signage she could identify from the street. Not ominous, just controlled, the way certain spaces are when they've been designed to contain information rather than people. A table, 6 chairs, a window with the blinds angled down, coffee in a carafe she didn't touch. Agent Reyes sat across from her. On the chair beside him was empty for 4 minutes, and then it wasn't. The woman who entered was in her mid-60s, silver hair pulled back, 4 stars on her shoulders. She moved like someone who had long ago stopped performing authority because she no longer needed to. She sat down, opened a folder, and looked at Imani the way you look at someone you already know something important about. "Miss Reeves, I'm General Diane Harlow, Inspector General's office. Thank you for coming. I didn't have many other options." The general's expression didn't change. "No, I suppose you didn't. I'm sorry about that." She said it like she meant it, which was not what Imani had expected. "I'll be direct with you. You've earned that." Walter Gaines. His real name, she learned. Not the Walter with no last name she'd known for 8 months, had spent 30 years as a senior intelligence analyst embedded in agencies that don't officially conduct domestic operations. His code name was Oracle. His clearance level was a number rather than a word. In 2009, he was pushed out, not retired, pushed. He had refused to sign off on an assessment he knew had been falsified. A report used to justify a covert surveillance program that had, over the following 6 years, directly contributed to the deaths of 4 people and the wrongful imprisonment of 11 more. Walter had documentation. He had names. He had 15 years of careful, meticulous records kept by a man who understood better than anyone that the truth needed a chain of custody to survive. The people who had signed that report had spent those same 15 years trying to find him. "He disappeared completely," General Harlow said. "No financial trail, no address, no medical records. We lost him in 2011 and didn't pick up a confirmed signal until 8 weeks ago." She paused. "Neither did they. Until recently." Imani's voice came out steadier than she felt. "The cardboard, the corner, that was deliberate. The most effective cover available. Become someone no one looks at." The general's jaw tightened slightly. It worked. For 15 years it worked. The room was quiet for a moment. "Why me?" Imani asked. She already half knew. She needed to hear it said. "He watched that corner every morning for 2 years," Harlow said. 12 regular commuters, various others. He needed someone to hold something for him, someone the other side would never think to look at. Someone who couldn't be traced back to his world. She looked at Imani directly. "You were the only one who stopped, not once. Every single day for 8 months. He made his decision." The note, the general explained, was not simply a phone number. It was an authentication code, proof of chain of custody. Proof that Imani was the person Walter had chosen. With it, she could legally transfer what Walter had hidden. A drive, the falsified report, the names. 15 years of documentation that had survived because one man had been willing to sleep on cardboard to protect it. Imani sat with that for a moment. She was not awed. What moved through her was quieter than awe and more durable, a steady, low anger at the architecture of it. Mess at the system that had looked at a man with 30 years of service and a conscience and decided the most efficient solution was to push him out and wait for him to disappear. He had disappeared. On his own terms. That was something. "His wrist," she said. "There was a mark. Inside the left wrist. I saw it when he came back after the 11 days. General Harlow paused for the first time. A real pause, not a rhetorical one. "A tracking chip, self-administered." Her voice was even. "In case he was taken before he could reach you, so we could find him, or find out what had happened to him." Self-administered. Imani closed her eyes. She thought about Walter on his cardboard, asking about her patients by name, splitting nothing into something and handing her the larger half. Keeping 15 years of truth alive in a trash bag at the corner of Delancey and 5th, waiting for one person to stop walking past. She opened her eyes. "Where is he now?" she asked. The general's expression answered before her words did. She found out Walter was dead and had 40 minutes to grieve before everything accelerated. General Harlow gave her the time, stepped out, left water on the table, closed the door without making a production of it. Imani sat in the conference room alone and looked at the closed blinds and thought about a man who had drunk her coffee every morning for 8 months and never once asked for anything except that she keep a folded note she didn't understand. He had died 4 days ago. Cardiac arrest in a county medical facility 2 states away under a name she didn't recognize. Alone. And the way people die when they've spent 15 years making sure no one could find them. Something happened. When Harlow came back, she wasn't alone. Reyes was behind her, and behind him, a man Imani hadn't seen before. Younger than Reyes, carrying a laptop, moving with the specific urgency of someone delivering bad news they've already processed so they can deliver it efficiently. "They know you exist," Harlow said, sitting down. No preamble. "We intercepted a query 40 minutes ago. They don't know what Walter gave you, but they know he trusted someone at that corner, and they have your bus route." She let that land. "You have approximately 48 hours before they know everything we know." The younger man opened the laptop. Imani didn't look at it. "What do you need from me?" What they needed was her testimony. He'd had a closed hearing before the Inspector General's office. Not Congress, not public, not yet. Walter's authentication code transferred formally, on record, with Imani as the named witness to its chain of custody. Without that testimony, the evidence could be challenged, buried, stolen through legal channels by people who understood how to use process as a weapon. "Your statement locks it," Harlow said. "It becomes protected, untouchable." "And if I don't?" A pause that answered the question. The door opened. The man who entered was in a suit that cost more than Imani's monthly rent, carrying nothing, needing nothing. He introduced himself with a name attached to a law firm she'd never heard of, and sat down across from her with the relaxed posture of someone who had done this before and knew how it ended. He was not unkind. And that was the unsettling part. "Miss Reeves," his voice was measured, reasonable. "I want to be honest with you about your position. The materials you're holding, knowingly or not, place you in a legally complicated situation. Your nursing license operates under a state board that responds to federal flags. Your testimony, if given without proper counsel, could be characterized in ways that affect your career, your record." He folded his hands. "I'm not threatening you. I'm describing reality." A small pause. "You're a nursing aide from the Bronx. You brought a man breakfast. That's a good thing. It doesn't have to become your entire life." He leaned forward slightly. "This is not your war." The room was very quiet. Imani looked at him. She thought about Walter pressing that note into her palm with hands that had a tracking chip in one wrist because he'd known they might come for him before he could reach her. She thought about 15 years on cardboard, 15 years of keeping something true alive because no one else would. Only if something happens. She looked at the lawyer. "You're right," she said. "I'm a nursing aide from the Bronx. I bring people breakfast. I show up when no one else does." She held his gaze. "That's exactly why he chose me." She turned to General Harlow. "Tell me where to sign." They drove her home at 9 p.m. She went inside, stood in her apartment in the dark for a moment, and then turned on the kitchen light because the dark felt like too much. She made coffee she didn't particularly want, and sat on the floor with her back against the cabinet, the same position she'd been in the night she opened the note, and let herself feel the full weight of what she'd just done. She was afraid, not of the lawyer, not of the people Harlow had described. Afraid in the quieter way. The way you're afraid when you've made an irreversible decision and the adrenaline has cleared, and it's just you and the size of it. She called her mother. "Hey, baby, you okay? It's late." "Yeah." She watched the steam rise from her mug. "I'm okay. I just wanted to hear your voice." "Long shift?" "Something like that." They talked for 11 minutes about nothing important. Her mother's neighbor. A recipe. Whether Imani was eating enough. The ordinary architecture of being loved by someone who doesn't know what you've just walked into. After she hung up, Imani sat at her window with the coffee and looked down at the street below. The city moved like it always did, indifferent, continuous, unaware. Somewhere down there, at the corner of Delancey and Fifth, a piece of pavement held the ghost of a cardboard impression that the rain would eventually finish erasing. She wrapped both hands around the mug. Tomorrow, she would testify. Tonight, she just sat with the weight of it, and the fear, and underneath both of those things, something quieter and more certain. She had shown up, same as always. 6 months later, the falsified report was public record. 3 former officials had resigned, 1 with a statement, 2 without. The covert program Walter had refused to validate was shuttered, its infrastructure quietly dismantled by people whose names would never appear in any article. That the Inspector General's closed hearing had produced a 40-page findings document that was, for the most part, inaccessible to the public. For the most part. Imani's name appeared in exactly 2 news articles. She had refused every interview request, which numbered more than she'd expected, and fewer than the general had warned her about. She was still a nursing aide at Mercy General, still took the M15 bus, still wore the same scrubs, still carried the same bag, still got up early enough to watch the city find its volume before most people opened their eyes. Some things had changed. Some things were exactly the same. She had learned in the past 6 months to hold both of those truths without needing to resolve them into one. Walter's memorial was held on a Tuesday, which felt right. Small room, 7 people total. General Harlow stood near the window in civilian clothes, which made her look like someone's composed and silver-haired aunt. Two men Imani didn't recognize sat in the back row, older, moving with the careful deliberateness of people who had spent their careers being unobtrusive and hadn't quite been able to stop. Former colleagues, the general had said quietly before the service. They had known Walter when he still had an office and a badge and a name on an internal directory somewhere. There was no flag ceremony. Walter had specifically requested none. A note to that effect found with his documentation, written in the same controlled block print Imani recognized from the folded note she'd carried for 3 days in her scrubs pocket. At the front of the room, a single photograph. Walter younger, maybe 50, sharp-eyed, wearing a suit instead of an oversized jacket, standing in what looked like a government corridor with the quiet authority of a man who belonged exactly where he was. She almost didn't recognize him. Then she did. The stillness was the same. The eyes were the same. The quality of attention was identical. A chaplain read one line from something Walter had written, date unknown. 7 words. The best intelligence is knowing who to trust. Imani looked at the photograph for a long time after. The Inspector General's office, in the months following the hearing, established a formal whistleblower protection fund for intelligence community employees. A structural response to what Walter's case had exposed about how the system disposed of people who told the truth at personal cost. The fund needed a civilian oversight board. One seat was specifically designated for someone outside the apparatus entirely. They asked Imani. She kept her nursing shifts. She took the board seat. She did both, which meant her schedule was unreasonable and her days were long, and she was, for the first time in her adult life, doing exactly what she was supposed to be doing with whatever she had. On a Wednesday morning in November, exactly 1 year after she'd first crouched down at the corner of Delancey and Fifth with an overfull thermos, Imani came around that corner on her way to the bus and stopped walking. Someone new was there. A woman, maybe 50, sitting against the laundromat wall with her knees pulled up and a paper coffee cup gone cold beside her. Not on cardboard. Just sitting with the particular stillness of someone who has nowhere to be and no one expecting them and has made an uneasy peace with both of those things. Imani had a board meeting at 9. 3 patients to check on before noon. The bus she needed came in 4 minutes. She looked at the woman. She looked at the thermos in her hand. The same one, still warm, overfilled the way she always made it now. Old habit. She had stopped pretending it was an accident. She crossed the street, crouched down. I made too much, she said, holding out the thermos with both hands. You want some? The woman looked at the thermos, then at Imani's face. A long, measuring silence. The specific caution of someone who has learned to tell the difference between pity and something else entirely, deciding which this was. She took it with both hands. Imani straightened up, adjusted her bag, and walked toward the bus stop without looking back. She didn't need to. Walter used to say the best intelligence is knowing who to trust. Imani had learned something adjacent to that in the year since. Something smaller, maybe, but more durable. The best humanity is knowing who to stop for. Not once when it's convenient or comfortable or when you have enough to spare. Every day. Especially when you don't. Without needing to understand why it matters before you do it. It always matters. The bus came. She got on. Through the window, the corner of Delancey and Fifth slid past. The laundromat wall, the woman with the thermos, the ordinary, unremarkable geometry of a place where 2 people had once spent 15 minutes a day and changed the shape of things. Then the bus turned, and it was gone. But what it had made remained. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that small acts are never small. Leave a comment below. Tell us about someone you stopped for, or someone who stopped for you. And if you haven't already, subscribe so you're here when the next story drops. At Black Voices Uncut, we tell it like it is, because the truth deserves nothing less.